Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
Mitchell, father of the Spitfire. Reginald Mitchell is one of the greatest names in aviation history, a visionary engineer with a passion for speed. His legacy is the most iconic fighter aircraft of all time, the Spitfire. We've just had the 85th anniversary, of course, of the Battle of Britain. I'm delighted to say the man who knows more about this than possibly anybody else flying today is Paul Beaver, and Paul joins me on the line now. Paul, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning to you.
Good to have you. Whereabouts are you? Are you somewhere near Biggin Hill, looking across a windswept airfield, perhaps, and deciding whether to take the Hurricane, the Spitfire up today?
Wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't that be lovely? It's a very grey day in London, I have to tell you, and not dissimilar from the weather that there would have been 85 years ago, of course, in the Battle of Britain.
Yeah, absolutely. And the weather always gets to say in any sort of aerial combat, doesn't it? Now, the Spitfire, I mean, it is... And I know we overuse this word iconic, but my goodness, I mean, you just have to see the silhouette of a Spitfire as it banks, and you can spot you know exactly what it is. And more than that, it means so much to sort of basically it's gone through generations, hasn't it? I mean, from the 40s, the 50s, if you're a schoolboy growing up in the 70s and you see a Spitfire, you know exactly what you're looking at.
Yeah, the Spitfire's iconic in both shape, I think, of the design, in the sound that the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and later the Griffin. The Merlin is a sort of a purr, the Griffin is a growl. And of course, they were quite different engines in the sense that they were designed for different purposes because the Spitfire evolved. I mean, there were 72 variants of the Spitfire, 24 marks. I mean, they had Spitfires on floats. They had Spitfires as long-range reconnaissance aircraft with no armament, just the wings converted into complete fuel tanks. Unbelievable.
Of course, now, because I know a little bit about something or other, but is it officially the submarine Spitfire? I seem to remember that coming. Is that the full name for it, or am I completely wrong?
Yeah, and you've hit the nail on the head there. I mean, the company Supermarine was bought out by Vickers, which at the time was the largest engineering company in the world. So it became, in some places, the Vickers Armstrong Spitfire when they built 10,000 of them in the Midlands. But most of us know it as the Supermarine Spitfire because what Vickers did was keep the Supermarine name going because it was so iconic, with, of course, winning the Schneider Trophy in 1931. It was 3 consecutive wins, got Britain the trophy, and they were all designed by Reginald Mitchell. And I think that's the pinnacle of his single engine racing seaplane design. It was a really interesting time because France and Italy and Britain were pitted against America, developing more and more powerful engines, better streamlined airframes. It must have been an amazing time to live through. Do you know that 1 million people went to the Venice Lido to see one of the Schneider Trophy events? But in 1931, when Britain was on the cusp of winning, 2 million people went to the south coast of Britain. They had special trains, special buses, special boats. It was a long course. It went all the way down to Sussex and back across the Isle of Wight. And it was just the World Cup. Football just really doesn't do it for the Schneider Trophy.
So the Schneider Trophy, for those who don't know, this is the air race. This is air racing. Is it land based or sea boat based?
It's racing seaplanes, mate. Yeah. It really is absolutely iconic all the time, and mainly because the aircraft took something like 3.5 miles to take off. And so, these guys were bouncing around. It must have been so uncomfortable. I've flown seaplanes in many countries, in Norway, Sweden, Italy, Britain, Canada a lot. And in a rough day, it can be quite jarring. But if you are doing it for 3.5 miles instead of 300 meters, it must be absolutely horrendous.
And of course, this is the time that this is the brave new world of it. You know, people have only been flying really for less than 30 years at this point. And it's part of that. It is the time when, my specialist subject is motor racing. So I know that during this time, all the nations have got different colours. So, France races, Italy races in red, etc. British race in green, all that sort of thing. France is in blue. And it's very much the pride of your nation. It's showing how technical you've. This is why the Italians, Mussolini loves his aeroplanes, because it shows that there's, because fascism is on the cutting edge of technology, or likes to think it is, with the brave new world, and that's why they are so. Everybody's getting into planes because it shows how advanced they are.
Yeah, El Forza. This is exactly the Italian thing. Italian aircraft were red, British aircraft were blue. Mm-hmm. The Americans had a sort of silver color, basically the base metal. And of course, Germany wasn't in it because Germany wasn't allowed to build airplanes because of the Versailles Treaty. All they did was sit on the sidelines and watch, make notes, and being Germans were very thorough about the whole thing. You can imagine if the Germans had been there, it might have been a different situation, but that's purely, that's just posturing, really, from my point.
Yeah, but you can just imagine, because what they were doing with Mercedes towards the mid to the end of the 30s, and that's because they were allowed to go motor racing. But they were quite big on gliders, the Germans, and therefore, we can see what happens then when, by 1939, all those young glider pilots suddenly can flip very easily into single-seater, aircraft. Now, tell me about...
Okay, but before you leave that, the German glider technologies and the wing technologies are fundamental to the Spitfire.
Okay, right. So
the wing was designed by Beverly Shenstone, a Canadian who was doing his PhD in the University of Berlin and flying gliders at the weekend. And he designed the wing along with a guy called Professor Dr. Engineer Lippisch, who was the world's leading and forever the world's leading expert on wings. And between them, they designed the elliptical wing, which is the iconic Spitfire wing. So you could say, Germany had a bit to do with the Spitfire.
I can hear our listeners quivering, spluttering, their cups of tea slamming to the floor. It's more so than normal with my shows. Gosh. So tell me, so we all know that we'll come on to the elliptical wing in a minute, but tell me a little bit then about Mitchell and where he comes from, and because we see him as this, as part of that great sort of stream of engineers that Britain has produced. We go Barnes Wallis, and then we go to what we would call the garagistas, in car terms. So is he one of these guys who likes to fiddle around in a workshop? Tell me a little bit about Mitchell, please.
Yeah, Mitchell, really interesting character. Born in Stoke-on-Trent, 1895, and he was apprenticed as an engineer with a company called Kerr, Stewart and Company, which made a specialist locomotives, best way of describing it. At the time, before the First World War, British locomotive engineering was the pinnacle of engineering. It was the AI of the time. Everybody wanted to go there. Sir Henry Royce, as in Rolls-Royce, was a railway engineer. Mitchell employed railway engineers because they were used to innovation, they were used to adapting, they were just right to come into the aircraft industry of the post-1918 period.
And so he's, so how does he make his transformation then into aviation? Is it a case that he was one of the people that sort of sees this coming? Go on.
I think he does. I mean, what he does is, which I think is fabulous, is he builds his own aeroplanes. His father, who was what is described as a master printer, so his father allows him to have an engineering workshop at home. And he builds his own aeroplanes. And they fly them on Hanworth Common in near Stoke-on-Trent. And he's mad about aeroplanes. So his first job application is to be personal assistant to the owner of a little company down in Southampton in the First World War, building seaplanes or fighting flying boats for the Admiralty, for the Royal Navy. And he gets the job. And by the time he's 24, he is made chief engineer and chief designer of this little company. And what he's doing at the end of the First World War is he's buying back these fighter flying boats, which are no longer needed, converting them to passenger aircraft. So he creates, along with the owner of the company, Hubert Scott Payne, they produce the first airline in the world, a scheduled service between Southampton, the Isle of Wight, the Channel Islands, and Bournemouth. And it's in a flying boat, and it's open cockpit, so you get a seal skin to wear. Here you are, passenger, paying a lot of money in those days.
Yeah,
and it's in the outside, and you get absolutely soaked. And of course, it's full all the time because everyone wants to do it.
If anybody's listening from Ryanair, by the way, don't try this at home, because I can just see that being the next generation of low cost budget airlines.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly a budget airline, I have to tell you. It was more expensive by about ×4 than the steamer.
Yeah,
but
okay.
It was quicker than the steamer. So that's why people wanted it.
So we get onto the, as I said before, we get onto the Snyder Trophy. This is really pushing the boundaries of technology. And if you think of what was cutting edge technology sort of in the 1920s, was sort of the Tiger Moth biplane, front engine, open cockpit. Where do we get this? Is it because streamlining becomes a thing? The wind tunnels and people are learning as they go about the actual science of aviation. What will become sort of aviation and flying?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, the way to look at it, I think, is look at speed. At the beginning of the First World War, aeroplanes were very lucky to go more than about 90 miles an hour. And then by the end of the First World War, they're doing about 120. By the middle of the 1920s, they were doing 250. And then by 1931, they're doing 400 miles an hour. And the reason for this exponential climb in speed is because people like Mitchell were saying, well, traditional round engines, that big piston radial engines, all that's going to do is give you drag. What you need to do is streamline. But the engine manufacturers weren't building those. And so this is why his work with Rolls-Royce is so important in the 20s, making the engines what they call in line. In other words, that they are the shape that we see them today, with the cylinders in a V, and they're big, 27-litre engines.
Lots of fun. So are we looking then at chicken and egg here? Because you can't build the Spitfire unless you've got an engine to put in it, or do you build a Spitfire first and then design the engine, to go in there? I mean, or is it in? Are they?
You can't have chicken and egg. You've got to work together. So, within about 6 weeks of the Snyder win in 1931, the Air Ministry in Britain put a specification out to I think there were 8 manufacturers, and said, we want a fighter aircraft to shoot down bombers. And everybody complied. And Mitchell, this is really the last design that Mitchell leads, something called the Type 224. And it's, to use a British expression, it's a complete Horlicks.
Right.
It doesn't climb, it doesn't fly fast, it doesn't have the endurance. And he sort of says, right, it's very clear, I need a team. So he gets a team around him. Shenston with the wings, Al Faddy with the main design and structure, Alan Clifton, Joe Smith, Trevor Westbrook, all these people, Trevor Mansbridge, all these people get together. And there's a brilliant story that Mitchell and Faddy, who were great friends, used to have lunch together. And while the ladies were doing the washing up, as they used to in those days, he and Mitchell and Faddy started thinking about where all the mistakes were in the 224 and how they could make it a better aeroplane. And they drew it on the tablecloth. white linen tablecloth with very, very soft pencils. And engineers use soft pencils. And they did the calculations that they needed on the wallpaper behind.
Right.
And of course, after about half an hour of this brilliant work, Mrs. Faddy comes in and throws a wobbly. And we lose the very first general arrangement diagram for the Spitfire because she takes it off and washes it. And the boys have to go into the office very early the next morning and try and recreate their ideas. I mean, it's a great story. And a national newspaper ran it. And I think as a result, we now know the house where it was going to be when it was done. And I think they might have a blue plaque coming their way, whether they like it or not.
Marvellous. But it's very interesting because, again, this is one of the things about the Spitfire is it is a team effort. And if it hadn't been a team effort, with Mitchell's demise, it might have just stalled because he's got the team that can carry on. I mean, that's because we seem to think, don't we, of a single genius, but this is very much, and you mentioned one guy's doing the wings, I mean, it is very much a team effort, but he's always been good, but maybe a little unfairly put sort of at the pedestal, though he's obviously brilliant.
Yeah, I think what his innovation and his ability to adapt technology are important, but most important are his leadership skills in putting a team together, getting them all to work in the same way. Remembering at the time he was dying of cancer. And so you've got this background from 1933 onwards. He had incurable cancer. They operated, they cut bits out of him. It still didn't do any good. He knew he was dying. And yet he still kept working. And when he was in his last, 12 months at home, he was still designing. And he designed a 4-engine bomber that would have flown faster, further, higher than even the mighty Lancaster. So we've got a really interesting development here in terms of the way in which aircraft were put together, because up until the early 30s, one designer designed an airplane and was responsible for everything you got people to do. Got people to do little bits of it. Perhaps the wings, do some calculations. What Mitchell did was he got 150 people together to work on this airplane.
Wow.
And that was the secret. That's why it's so good. It's because it has the sum total of the knowledge of 151 young men. And we are talking young men. Mitchell was 42 when he died in 1937. So we are talking of young men.
I thought I found it interesting, and I wasn't aware of this, the fact that he's looking at the designs for a bomber that can go, higher, further, faster than the Lancaster. So is he sort of preceding what will happen over at Boeing with the B-29 there? Does he know that you're going to you need something that big? And again, because bombing will come to fruition in 37, the year that he dies with the Condor Legion's attack on Guernica, the bomber will always get through. Bombers are because people are believing after the carnage of the First World War that the bomber will inflict the carnage of the First, as it does, will inflict the carnage of the First World War on civilian populations. Therefore, they have to be stopped. Therefore, you need a fighter, and a fighter is a defensive weapon, not that we all seem to think of it when schoolboys as Spitfires sort of strafing the enemy, but their principal aim is to allow the bombers to get through.
Yeah. The Spitfire, the Hurricane are all designed to shoot down bombers, because if you think of the geography at the time, Germany is across the other side of the North Sea. The Netherlands and Belgium are neutral countries. France has the largest air force in the world, the largest army in the world, the most mechanized army, the most tanks, the second largest navy. France was never going to fall. I mean, France would fight, and as it did in the First World War. So we were looking at the threat being German bombers, what are called medium bombers, so not huge aircraft, twin-engined aircraft, flying from Germany across the North Sea and would be engaged, somewhere between Dover and Newcastle, say. And all that went to pieces in 1940 when Germany, within a matter of weeks, wrapped up everywhere from Norway to the Pyrenees. And so suddenly it was all different. But luckily, even though Mitchell was dead, he had created an aeroplane which could be the point defence of the UK. Now, the Spitfire didn't win the Battle of Britain, but we may have lost it if we didn't have sufficient Spitfires. And for 1 year period, there were no Spitfires produced because Supermarine was a cottage industry. It was used to building small-scale numbers of aircraft. It couldn't get its head around building 310 aircraft. And it needed a lot of effort to get it to produce the first aircraft, which didn't arrive into the first squadron until August 1938. So, luckily, the Munich crisis delayed the war by a year. Otherwise, we would have been in a pretty difficult situation.
It's one of the things as well, the fact that because the Messerschmitt 109 is faster, it's got more, it's got cannon for goodness sake, on it. So if you've got one behind you, but it's the thing that really, and the Hurricane's a great plane, but it's got the tendency to stall without telling you. Is it the performance, because people think of Spitfires as zooming past them, but is it the low speed maneuverability that makes Spitfires so integral and so special?
I think the Spitfire is really good above at altitude, and it could climb faster than the Hurricane. Same engine, basically, but it was climbing at about a third more of the speed. So in the 15 minutes of combat climb to get to the fighting area, a Hurricane would get to about 10, 12,000 feet, and the Spitfire was up at 15, 16.
Right.
The Germans had the advantage of the Bf 109 above 20,000 feet, but the Spitfire and Hurricane could both outturn the 109 because they had what's called low wing loading. In other words, that the wings were able to fly better in most conditions. It's all about stall. It's all about drag. It's all about lift. And the aim of designing the Spitfire was it would get to altitude, it would use its 14.7 seconds of ammunition. This is not the Dunkirk movie.
Yes, I know. We all throw things at that. You can't go for half an hour, can you?
You certainly can't. And so the differences in all this were you had to learn the tactics as well. So this is where the people like Dowding and Park and the great fighter leaders like Milan and Darley and Stanford Tuck came in because they changed the way you do the flying.
Yeah, absolutely. Was it a joyous plane to fly? Because people talk about taking the crate up there, and with the greatest respects to the Halifax or the Wellington, perhaps people might not have said they were, but the Spitfire is a great plane. Is a responsive plane to fly.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have flown Spitfire, so I can tell you that it is very. You think it into a turn, you don't try and turn it. If you put too much rudder in or you put too much aileron in, you flip over. It's very responsive, so you just have to learn to treat it like a lady. And if I can quote to you from the late Joy Lofthouse, a ATA, Air Transport Auxiliary pilot who used to deliver Spitfire. She delivered 410 Spitfires.
And these are the unsung heroines, aren't they? The ladies who take these of the auxiliaries. Yeah, they really are.
Were quite remarkable. I knew a lot of them. They were just fabulous. They were icons of their day, and they were icons. That Joy died 10 years ago. I mean, but she used to say, in the air, the Spitfire was the most beautiful woman. The most beautiful thing, responsive, whatever. On the ground, she was a right bitch. And I just love that coming from an 80-something-year-old, very pristine lady. And she said, and I concur with this, the Spitfire is very difficult to land. And when you do land it successfully, you haven't really finished the landing until you're in the bar having your first beer, because it can take you at any time. It's got a small fin and rudder. If it's the slightest crosswind. You had to be using your feet with the rudder all the time in order to keep the aircraft straight. And you've always got the risk of tipping over with too much brake. It's very sensitive on the ground because it's not designed to be on the ground. It's designed to be in the air. And that's where it's amazing.
Here's a question for you, Paul, because obviously, I mean, when you get into a Spitfire for the first time, and I've stood, at Silverstone watching, Spitfires fire up, and it is quite an amazing experience. So your first time when you fired up a Spitfire, and those jets of fire, come shooting out of the Merlins or the Griffins, what does that feel like?
Yeah, well, if you've got too much flame, you get told off because it means you've overprimed the engine. But it is actually a momentous time when you flick open the safety cover and you press that starter button, and you can hear the fire, and it all the cylinders fire, and yeah, it's amazing. And you sit there and I'm afraid you breathe in the fumes and you go, bloody hell, this is amazing. But it's more amazing is when you're flying and you look out to left or right and you have that wing, that elliptical wing with British markings on, and you just go, wow, I'm just stepped back 80 years or whatever it is into the Second World War. And I think that's interesting. It would certainly taking a Spitfire will bring you one back from Norway, stopping in Denmark and Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium to refuel, because it's not a very long-range aircraft.
Yeah.
It's amazing the effect it has. We were flying a two-seat aircraft back through the Netherlands once, and the Dutch controller said, we asked for, I was doing the radio saying, I'd like to go through your zone to avoid Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. It's TMA, Terminal Maneuvering Area, in other words, where all the airliners are. And the Dutch controller said, negative, unless you come down our main runway at 500 feet and do a victory roll.
Oh.
And the Dutch have a sense of humour. The Dutch have a sense of history. The Dutch are fabulous. And so we did. And it was, you can't do anything else but that, can you? If somebody says, can you come down our main runway at 500 feet? Yeah, of course you can.
And do a victory roll?
And of course you do an aileron roll. Yeah, victory roll. Oh. And climb away. And looking out left and right, you could see that they'd obviously done a broadcast on the PA saying, hey, there's a Spitfire coming down, because everywhere, every vantage point, they were full of, this is a Dutch naval air station, so full of Dutch Navy people. It has the imagination of Europe. I mean, in Germany, I've been told by a German that the Spitfire liberated the country from the Nazis. In Norway, it's the first aircraft of their air force. We gave them 2 squadrons of Spitfires to form their air force. Even in France, there are Spitfires. I mean, the French can be very partisan about their aeroplanes, but they recognize the merits of the Spitfire. And of course, they're flying in Australia, in New Zealand, they're flying in South Africa, they're flying in the States. Everyone has to have a Spitfire at an air show. If you haven't got a Spitfire at an air show, it's not an air show. Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's not a proper air show without a Spitfire. Paul, I could talk to you about this until the crosswinds get us, but unfortunately I'm going to run out of time. The book is called Mitchell, Father of the Spitfire. It's by Paul Beaver, and you can order it via our own virtual bookstore. Paul, as you can probably tell by the tone of my voice, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about Reginald Mitchell, who was the father of the Spitfire and perhaps one of our greatest engineers.
Paul Beaver, thank you so much for your time today.